morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning for our Black History Month program featuring Ms. Charlene Carruthers. I have the privilege of introducing her this morning, and I am so happy she's here. Charlene, thank you so much for joining us. This is wonderful for us.
Thank you for having me. To be here.
Absolutely. Ms. Carruthers is nationally recognized as one of the top 10 most influential African Americans by the Root 100, one of Ebony Magazine's Woke 100, an emerging power player in Chicago Magazine, and is the 2017 recipient of the YWCA's Dorothy I Height Award. Her book, Unapologetic, provides a vision of how social justice movements can become sharper and more effective through principled struggle, healing, justice, and leadership development. Keonga Taylor, author of hashtag Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation, writes of her book Unapologetic, this brilliant and powerful book is a clarion call to keep alive the Black radical tradition in these reactionary times. If you want to understand this movement and the people whose hands are dirty from working with the grassroots, then you need to read this book. Dr. Cornell West writes, Charlene Carruthers stands in the great lineage of Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells Barnett, and Marsha P. Johnson, grand fighters and great lovers of everyday Black people and oppressed folks everywhere. We are privileged today to have her here with us to share her work, to share her insights, and it is with great pleasure that I present to some and introduce to others, Ms. Charlene Carruthers.
Thank you so much, Ms. Fuller. I am so glad to be here with you all today, and it's just a privilege and it's an honor anytime I have the opportunity to meet and talk with people about my work and really broadly the work that Black people have been engaged in this world for the past several hundred years as we not only fight for our lives, but fight to transform the world, the very world that we live within. And so thank you, Ms. Fuller, and everyone on your team who took the time, the patience, the energy, all of those things to make sure that this event and all of your events that are happening this month happen. Because we are living in the middle of a global pandemic, y'all. And I don't have to tell, like, that's not news to anyone who's here today. And so anytime that we have the opportunity to gather, I consider to be a gift. Knowing that many of us, including myself, I imagine many of you all on this in this event today have lost loved ones in the past year, be it due to COVID-19 complications or to other things. We are also living in a moment of great uprising, where everyday people, long-term activists and organizers are all pitching in to do their part in order to change this country, and not just change it a little bit, but to radically transform it. And so today, I am going to talk a little bit with you all about some of the ideas that I've been thinking through, some of the work that I've been involved in, and invite you all to ask yourselves 5 questions that I've developed for anyone. And so by the end of our conversation today, my greatest hope is that I've said something that makes you think. Maybe said something that you disagree with and you're like, let me go investigate this a little bit more myself. And that you move away from this conversation at best, right? Being a little agitated and also being interested in continuing or starting work towards our collective liberation. And so I think that it will be good for me to start with reading a little bit from Unapologetic. And if you happen to have the book, I'm reading from chapter 4. And chapter 4 is entitled 3 Commitments. And when I was writing Unapologetic, it took me about 3 or 4 years to write it. And I began to write this book because I was a young organizer. I'm born and raised on the South Side of Chicago. I currently live in Chicago now. And I remember being a young organizer and activist and looking for things to read. And there were always autobiographies available, biographies available. I could never find a book written by Ella Baker or Fannie Lou Hamer about how they did what they did. I could read, Dr. Barbara Ransby's biography on Ella Baker, which is an amazing book. I could read many books about Fannie Lou Hamer, books written by Dr. Angela Davis, all sorts of things. But I was like, where's a book written by a young Black person about how to organize, how to go about this thing? And more specifically, where is a book by Black feminists, by Black queer folks, younger folks, what have you, to talk about the world that we're living in now as it is and the world that we want to live in? And I couldn't find that book, y'all. So I did what Toni Morrison says that we should do. If there's a book that you want to read that has not been written, you need to go out and write it. And so if you're in this Zoom right now, you're like, oh my gosh, there's a book I want to read and it hasn't been written, please go out and write it. It's important. We need you. So chapter 4, 3 commitments, starts with an epigraph from a Gwendolyn Brooks poem titled Paul Robeson, in which she writes, "We are each other's business. We are each other's harvest. We are each other's magnitude and bond." Gwendolyn Brooks. Home is anywhere we belong, where we grow, where we're challenged, and where we are in relationship with others. BYP 100 is my first political home. As a founding member of the organization, I've helped shape it, shared countless meals with fellow members, and crafted plans for how we could improve it and improve the Black liberation movement. This political home isn't based in any one location. Like many Black people, we move. My political home is where I develop as a leader, where I belong with people who share values and vision and who take action for collective liberation. Movement building is spiritual work. It is beyond audacious to build an organization unlike any of us has ever been a part of. One based on group leadership and where marginalized people are centered. If someone had traveled into the future and compiled a list of things we accomplished in our first year, then brought it to us in 2013 at our start, we all would have exclaimed, hell no. We had extremely limited resources in the first year, and I was the only full-time paid staff member for 2 years. The majority of our leadership worked without pay or with modest pay. Money was tight, and I slept on members' couches and figured out how to make $10 out of 50 cents. A handful of folks who carried major areas of our work daily did so without pay. BYP 100 possessed a level of grit at the beginning that Black folks are used to dealing with. Our team worked hard to build an infrastructure that could last, that could stand up to the test of the work set before us. In the early days, people such as Jason Perez, Jessica Pierce, Terrence Laney, Rosa Frié, Jonathan Likes, and many others helped build the organization locally and nationally. Even with the foresight, research, and decades of collective experience, we were not prepared for the challenges to come. We had many breakdowns, and along the way, I learned that we weren't unique in our struggles. Not only were we repeating the experiences of previous movements before our time, we were experiencing the same challenges as similar organizations that also emerged during this era of the Black liberation movement, including the Black Lives Matter Global Network and the Dream Defenders. The pattern of what builds up and breaks down organizations reflect broader movement forces and social realities. And based on my experience and research of social movements, I have found that atrophy or breakdowns within movements for Black liberation, historically and in the present, largely derive from people not seeing themselves in the work, being traumatized, and not giving themselves or not being allowed time and space to do so, do the ongoing self-work and healing. And another factor is the culture of liberalism that allows for unchecked conflict and unprincipled struggle. And so what I think is that there are three things that we can all take up, no matter if you're an organizer, an activist, an educator, an artist, anything. One, we can all be committed to building many strong leaders. Two, we can adopt healing justice as a core organizing value and practice. And three, we can do the work to combat liberalism with principled struggle. So how do we even get to those three things? Where do they even come from? And you might be like, what is she even talking about? So before we even get there, or before we go into all of those things, I think there are 5 questions that all of us can engage in to help us get clarity about what it is we want to do and how we want to show up in the work. And so if you have pencil and paper or your notes document open, I'm going to move us through the 5 questions, and I invite you all to write them down. So when I talk about building many strong leaders, a major part of anybody being able to do anything in movement is knowing who you are. So the very first question is the question of who am I? And that question is not simply one that should be like, I can just say I'm Black, I'm queer, and I'm a woman. But that doesn't actually tell you anything about me. It doesn't tell you what my values are. It doesn't tell you what I care about. It doesn't tell you what I've been through. It doesn't tell you what I dream about, what excites me, what gets me out of the bed in the morning, and what are the things that sometimes keep me in the bed, make me feel unable to get out of the bed. So in asking that question of who am I, the answer to that question could be a multitude of things. I'm a daughter. I'm someone who believes in sitting at the feet of elders and listening to what they have to say. I may not always agree, but I can at least listen to what they have to say. I'm someone who believes in and works towards the abolition of the prison industrial complex, because I believe that we can deal with conflict, harm, and violence in radically different ways. I believe that we can deal with them without punishment, and we can actually resource our communities in the ways that they deserve to be resourced, and take away the resources from things that do not deserve to be resourced, like prisons, policing, and punishment. I'm a cook. I grow food. I love food from seed to table. All of these things are important to who I am and how I come into the world. The next question that follows after who am I is actually Ella Baker's question. And I'm not sure if any of you have ever heard of Ella Baker, but if you have, I'd love it if you all could pop in the chat anything that you know about Ella Baker, so other folks can also learn. So Ella Baker, she would always ask the question to people when she met them, who are your people? And she didn't just ask that because she was being nosy, or she asked the question, I imagine, because she was curious. And the answer to that question also has to do with who I am accountable to, who I am responsible for, right? So Ella Jo Baker was a prolific organizer. She was the executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the organization that Dr. King and like Reverend Ralph Abernathy and others were like the face of. But Ella Baker did a lot of the organizing work. She was the field secretary for the NAACP and also one of the folks who helped found the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And so when she would meet you, she would want to know who your people are, because this word or this thought about accountability, right, that people throw around all the time, holding such and such accountable, you need to be accountable. The person on the street can't hold me accountable. Far too many of us are very familiar with accountability equaling punishment, right? The response or the consequence being punishment. But in answering the who are your people, that might be your family members. It might be your comrades. It might be your coworkers. Who can hold me responsible when I do something that is out of line with my values? Who are the people who I go to when I am in need of care and when I am in need of respite, when I'm in need of advice, all of those things? that is the answer to, those are that is some of the way that you can answer the question of who are your people. The third question moves us from the who we are as individuals, the who am I, who are my people, to the question of what it is that we want. So if you remember earlier, I said the second thing that I think we need to commit to is healing justice as a practice, right? So that is one thing that I want for all of us. I want to live in a world where people who, many of us, I don't know I don't know if anybody here has never experienced pain. If you are, bless you. I don't know if there's anyone here who holds no trauma, has experienced no trauma in their lives. If you are, I'm glad for you. And the reality is that most of us in this world, and particularly people coming from what the Combahee River Collective would name as interlocking oppressions, which comes before intersectionality, but people who experience multiple systems of oppression in their everyday lives in harmful, hurtful, and traumatizing ways. Trauma is something that that many of us have experienced in various ways. And in thinking through the question of what do we want? What we want in our lives and in our social movements should be reflective of the things that we do not want to experience anymore, not just for ourselves, but for future generations to come and our ancestors, in recognitions of what our ancestors have either been through or the violence and the harm that our ancestors have enacted upon other people. So it's both. I'm not just talking about people who have been traumatized and survived violence or experienced violence. I am also talking about the people who come from an ancestry or generations who have enacted systemic violence on other communities. And so that I'm not being liberal about it. I'm talking about the people who enslave people, the people who displace indigenous people from their land, the people who currently incarcerate people, who make that choice, the people who imprison people, the people who arrest people. And I'm talking about the people who have been enslaved, the people whose land has been stolen, the people who have been incarcerated. And I am also talking about the people in our communities every day, right? Who experience violence, and in our communities who enact violence against other people in our communities. I'm talking about all of us. So what kind of world do we want to live in? And what are we willing to get there? Leads us to the next question of what are we building? And I believe in a diversity of tactics. I don't get too excited about the word diversity most days, because I think people use it in a very liberal way and not a very clear way. What do they mean when you say diversity? But I believe, like, I've voted in every election since I was 18 years old, no matter where I lived in the country. I have always voted. I am 35 years old. So I have been voting for, since I was 18, however many years that is, y'all can do the math. I believe in that. I also am very clear that no elected official in the United States of America is going to be the pathway towards liberation for me or my people or any group of oppressed people. They're not. What they can do is, at best, improve the conditions, get out of the way, and not make things worse. They can do some things. Because they have a lot of power over our everyday lives. And therefore, I believe that I should have a role in deciding who those people are and what they do and what they don't do. So I engage in that work. I do that work. I also know, as I said, they can't do everything. So I believe in organizing. I believe in building relationships with other people. I believe in direct action. I believe in nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience. I believe in all of that. I believe in some other things too. Like, I personally just don't, I don't think the US government as it is will ever function as a site of freedom or a platform of freedom for anybody. I think it's an imperial arm, an imperial force. It's a force that is dependent on its military, all of those things. I don't think our liberation is there. And I'm clear that here in the present day moment, in order for us to get to a world where we're not governed by these murderous states, we got a lot of work to do. So in asking yourself that question of what are we building, it is really a question, not one of like what you should be building. It is about people being clear about what they're building. And when there's not clarity, to not just be liberal about it and not say what's really going on. And not struggling just for the struggle's sake, to just argue with each other. But when we talk about combating liberalism through principled struggle and what we're building, I'm talking about us being honest and upfront with each other and not punishing people when they're being honest, even if you don't agree with it. Because oftentimes people don't speak up when they're working with each other because they're afraid they're going to be fired, or they're going to be beat, or they're going to be pushed out of the community. So whatever it is that we're building, if we're building a 40-year strategy, or we're building a direct action for next week, and we want to turn up because it's a Tuesday, let us all be clear about that. And when we are not clear that we are willing to, and as we're doing it, if we're not clear, or we are clear that we're willing to struggle with each other, honestly, and so that everyone can be within their full dignity. Because shaming people and guilting people, to me, are not sustainable tactics. They're not. And that doesn't mean nobody gets their feelings hurt, because you get your feelings hurt or you can be uncomfortable. But as there's a book about conflict not being harm. Just because we disagree with each other doesn't mean I've harmed you. But we should be able to disagree for the sake of advancing our struggle with each other. So as we're asking ourselves these questions of who am I? Who are my people? What do we want? What are we building? Leads me to my last question. Is, are we ready to win? Are we ready to win? And you might be saying, okay, I don't know. And when I'm talking about winning, I'm not just talking about, are we ready to win a campaign? That's insufficient. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, are we ready to just, only defund the police, even though that's a big thing. And I could talk more about that. We can win that, but that's not enough. The win to me is transformation of our society, where we can all live within our full dignity and right relationship with each other and the land that we live on. And that could mean all sorts of things on that pathway. It could mean universal health care, right? It could mean no borders that prevent people from moving, from being with their loved ones. It could mean free public transportation for everybody. It could mean universal childcare. Like, these are all things that are a part of it, right? Right of return to ancestral lands, all sorts of things. And you might be like, I'm not ready for that yet, or I don't know if I'm ready. And you might be like, yeah, I'm ready. But if you are one of the first in the first two categories of I don't know if I'm ready or no, I'm not ready, then now is the time to do that work. Now is the time to get ready. It's not too late. It's not too late. And if you're not in Texas or Mississippi, or I'm not sure what other, Tennessee, many of the states that were impacted by the snowstorms in the South and the Southwest, if you are there or you're not there, you have loved ones who are there. Many people were not prepared for this. I'm not talking about the snowstorm. They were not prepared for a local and a statewide government that did not prepare, that did not do their job, right? Because it's not just on individuals to make sure that they have supplies and a generator and everything. They pay taxes. They pay power. They pay electricity bills. They live in a place where they have elected officials who say that they are responsible for infrastructure. They failed those people. They failed them. They absolutely failed them. The privatization of electricity, the lack of account of taking responsibility for what they did not do, lack of machinery to clear things, all sorts of things, lack of investment. So now, unfortunately, people actually know what they may have to prepare for. And some people did, I'm sure, were prepared. I don't think everybody was completely unprepared, but many people were unprepared to live without heat and electricity, and they shouldn't have to be prepared for that. But now we know that that is something, no matter where you live in this country, you should be prepared for an environmental disaster. And so, well, how are we readying ourselves? And not just our own household, but what is our neighborhood? Because if you're the only one in the neighborhood with the lights on, what you think is gonna happen? So how do we think not just about ourselves, but also about others? And this, in the we y'all, I'm not just talking about y'all, I'm talking about me too. I'm in that scenario. I'm thinking through these things, like, what am I contributing to in all of this? So I invite you all to take these questions with you as they work or they don't work, in whatever way makes sense or doesn't make sense for you. And these are questions that you can work through with yourself or with other people, and keeping in mind that we need many strong leaders to do the work. We have to recognize that trauma, that most, if not all of us, have experienced trauma in our lives. Much of this trauma is due to systemic oppression, as a result of white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, ableism, patriarchy, and all its cousins of homophobia and transphobia, all of these things. People are carrying traumas, and so healing justice, I believe that we should take it up as a commitment. And then third, of combating liberalism, being straight up with each other and not being okay with just Band-Aid solutions or Band-Aid responses. And I do believe that if we can all be more curious and more rigorous in our own questioning of the world, that we can create that place for ourselves and future generations where we are all we can be in right relationship with each other, not free of violence and harm, because those things can still happen, but one where we respond to these things in radically different ways. So, thank you. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you so much. You've given us so much to think about, and I'm sure that there are a myriad of questions out there, but I'll give people an opportunity to compose them, get them ready, and I'll ask you one to get started, so that we can keep engaging with you while we do that. And one that I formatted is, it's a fact that Black and queer and trans women have been at the forefront, of movements for liberation, but at no point have Black trans people shared fully in the gains of the LGBTQ or the racial justice movements. What recommendations do you have for us as educators in higher ed to support in amplifying these voices and also for creating space?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great question. And it can start by, like, I don't know how many of you all have ever heard of Cece Mcdonald and her work. But Cece Mcdonald is a young Black trans woman who is also a prison abolitionist, who was incarcerated after she was attacked and defended her own life against an attacker. And that experience for her, she writes and talks about how that is what made her an abolitionist. And when she was she was put in the men's prison, and she decided to not fight to be put in a women's prison because she said that prisons aren't safe for anybody. No prison is safe for anybody. And so I think it's like having people like Cece Mcdonald come and talk with y'all, hiring people like Cece Mcdonald for these jobs, because I can't speak from the experience of a Black trans woman, and I don't think you're asking me to do that by any means. And I think that it's important for us to say that, because sometimes in higher education, people think that they can speak for other people, and the best I can do, and the best that any of us can do, is like not just bring those people to the table to be inclusive, but bring those people to the table to be decision makers too. And and bring people to the table who want those people to be decision makers, who will even ask the question. Like Ms. Fuller, I'm sure there are people in your position who would not ever ask that question or not ever think that it's one to even ponder. So you need people who care about, who care about all Black people, who care about the lives of all Black people at the table, and not just, you know, like bringing someone on to tokenize them. Because if they're just there they're on an island and they're the only one, and they're surrounded by people who don't care, then that actually doesn't help anything. That doesn't help the situation. And so I think in higher education, it's like, how are people investing in Black trans folk, Black trans women, Black queer and trans people as students, so that they can see that actually higher education is a route for me. It is a route for me. I could take this up. Like, are you mentoring someone? Because y'all know we all raggedy as college students. We don't know what to do. We're trying to figure it out. And so what does it mean for y'all to mentor them now, so that they can see higher education as a career route? So when it's time, because I don't think higher education is going anywhere anytime soon. So when it's time for them to decide what they want to do with their lives, they have had you all as possibility models, and if they can then continue to be possibility models for other people. And, you know, I don't think it's, that's what I think of. So it's definitely like bringing people to speak on campus who are leaders in Black, queer, and trans liberation work. And it's about like, who are the students who are on campus and how might they be mentored and supported so they can see higher education as a career route for themselves.
Thank you. I love that. Possibility models. I'm gonna steal it.
Oh, I got it from somebody else. I got it from somebody else. Yeah.
I think we have some questions in the chat now. I want to go in order.
Okay.
I started this morning reading Audre Lorde's The Uses of Anger. What are your thoughts on the use of anger as growth and as a catalyst for change? And how do you navigate that anger as a Black woman in academia?
Yeah, you know, I have a whole a whole row of Audre Lorde books behind me right now. I'm like, should I pull it out, like reference it, like referencing stuff. The uses of anger as a Black woman in the academy and as a catalyst for change. Cameron, I love it if you have any specific thought, like a quote or anything that you'd like to add into the chat. If you don't, that's totally fine too. But Audre Lorde, so much of her work, when even she's talking about the uses of anger, to me, it connects back to like the piece about healing justice and combating liberalism. Because I don't think it's helpful, but this is a culture that is, I think, promoted, at least in my experience in the academy. I don't think it's helpful for us to act like we're not angry about anything, or for us to act like there's nothing to be angry about. And oftentimes, like for me, I'll speak for me as a Black woman in academic settings and other professional settings, I'm just supposed to swallow it. I'm just supposed to be strong. I'm supposed to be quiet. And if I am so-called angry, like visibly angry about a thing, I'm called aggressive and like disruptive. And the truth is that we have many things to be angry about. And then for ourselves, if you are a Black woman, you're a Black woman in academia, I think some of the questions we can ask ourselves is what is important to me? What do I care most deeply about? And how can I show up even in anger in my full dignity, where I'm not showing up in ways that are out of line with my own values, out of line with my own commitments to myself. And that doesn't mean like, because I make a lot of facial expressions when I talk in general. It doesn't mean that you're calm all the time. It doesn't mean that you're nice all the time. But it does mean that you are centered in what matters most to you. And all this other foolishness that's happening around you may or may not be the thing for you to even take up or to carry. And it's not as simple as like choosing your battles, but it's like choosing what matters to you most and what is connected to like your purpose and your commitment to being there. And that Like for me, I can't do any of this alone. I can't do anything alone. Even if it's only one other person at the workplace, it's like, what is your broader community? Because isolation is one of the worst things, I think, for us as people, as human beings. Isolation is one of the most dangerous things. And you could be surrounded by people and still feel isolated. And so cultivating community outside of your institution, and I think that has been important to me, like in no matter what setting that I'm in. And Audre Lorde, of course, has so much to teach us about anger. And I highly suggest that other people check out that essay. But anger, I do think, can be a catalyst for our growth and our change. And I don't think anger is sufficient. I don't think anger is sufficient. Because if love is not on the other side of that anger, or if love is not coexisting with that anger or in relationship with that anger, then I think it could just result in your destruction or the destruction of the things that you care about most deeply. And so, yes, I believe anger has a place, and it should live in the realm alongside, beside, behind, above, whatever, around love, compassion, care. If the anger, the righteous anger that you hold about whatever's happening in the academy or in your life, in the world, consumes you, and there's no space for other things, for you to care for yourself and to allow other people to care for you, as a recipe for destruction, internally and externally. And we deserve more. You deserve more. You deserve a range of feelings. You deserve to have your anger, and you also deserve love and compassion and care. Just my thoughts.
Okay, we have another question. Do you have any thoughts on how to promote healing justice in higher education?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
can you see the chat by any chance?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, great.
Yep. Gosh, I'm trying to think. So this is my first time back in higher education since 2009. I graduated from Washington University in St. Louis social work program, the MSW program in 2009. So I'm just like back in higher ed now for the first time in, I guess, like a decade, a little bit over a decade. So I'm trying to think about the people who I know who work in higher ed and how they approach things. And I think the first thing that comes to mind is, don't settle with people telling you that healing justice is going to counseling services or getting a therapist. That's actually not enough. Don't settle for that as like a front for healing justice, or like just bringing somebody in for the retreat to do something. That's not enough. It is about becoming a part of culture. And I'm not sure if any university can fully embody or like take up healing justice, because that's not what their purpose is. Like that's not what they said they're there for. They may put it in the guidebook or claim that this is a place of belonging for you or a place for self-actualization, but that's largely not how they function. You may have teams that function in that way. So I think it operates on varying levels. It's like, what is the community of care in the university community? What are the sites of that? How can that be cultivated? What sorts of resources are put there? Are y'all like, on a base level, are you just working 80 hours a week and, continuously depleting yourself over and over and over again? What's the work culture like? And then the other piece, y'all are in Western Virginia. So how has the university been complicit in systemic oppression and violence and reproducing trauma? And how has its leadership and its broader community taken responsibility or account for that and done the work to even address the harms that they may have been involved in? And I can't think of a university that hasn't. I mean, I'm in Chicago. The University of Chicago has done all kinds of terrible things. Northwestern, I'm a PhD student there. they have done terrible things, especially to Native communities. Terrible history there. And so what are they doing about that? So I think when it comes to healing justice, there's a long view, things that have happened historically, and there's a long view of what could happen in the future. And it is also like what is happening on campus right now at the levels of how people are relating to each other and what resources they have access to. And so in some ways, it's about beginning or continuing to ask those questions about like what has happened here, what is happening here, what do we want to happen here moving forward. You can also we're really fortunate these days to have a lot more materials on these topics than we've ever had. And so a study group, a reading group, not a task force or a committee, I'm not talking about that, but I mean a space for people to start to learn about healing justice and what it might be, and to start like formulating ideas and questions about what it could mean for your campus community if you haven't done that already. Or if you have done it, more people doing it, I think could be helpful to get you started or continuing along the pathway of figuring out what that means for your particular institution.
Okay, we have a question from Eric Murphy.
Mhm.
Can you see it by any chance?
Eric Murphy, I don't
Okay, let me pop out and I'll read it.
see that.
Can you give us your thoughts of the best ways to support the mental health of Black men on campus where they don't see themselves hardly ever, keeping their
Mm,
voice, speaking truth to light, and creating space for them to be the men that they are, especially knowing the historical fear of them they encounter?
That's a tough one, and I don't think I'm gonna give a satisfactory answer to that. Because I don't have that answer to that question. I couldn't answer that question. You asked it about me and Black women, to be honest with you. Um, I do think about like how y'all are building community with each other and like bearing witness with each other to what is happening so that people don't feel that they are alone. Like, is there a single Black male student, a Black man student on that campus who has not been spoken to about, I see you, I know this is happening to me. How is this impacting you? How do you feel? Do you need something like, how are y'all creating community with each other, knowing that the institution ain't gonna change overnight? And sometimes it might not change the entire time that they're there. So what is it that they need? What is it that y'all need in order to be able to lean on each other? And while also making rightful demands and creating things that you all deserve on campus, while also seeing yourselves as a part and connected to other communities. And I think I say that because, you know, the isolation that Black men may be feeling on campus it's connected to the isolation that other Black people could be feeling on campus as well, that other undocumented students who may be Black or not Black, other queer and trans students, students who are first generation. And so where is the space for Black men, for people who identify as Black men, to have amongst themselves, and also how are they connecting to other groups who are also having similar feelings of isolation and lack of access to what they need, and maybe not even being heard. So I always think that people who share identifications and values, because just because you're Black don't mean you share the same values. We all know that. How is it that people who have enough shared values, they have their space, and like shared identity and shared values, they have a space for themselves? I believe in that. And I believe in also those groups of people connecting with other groups of people in order to create the overall kind of campus climate that they want to create, not just for themselves, but for students to come, because they're going to leave that campus one day. how do they want to have left it? And I think all the answers to those questions like come with each new group of students, and they can be built upon. That's my best thinking around it, and I know that's not like sufficient. That's the best thinking I
I thought I thought you handled that pretty
have.
well.
Oh, thank you.
I have another question. In
Mhm.
your book, you speak of stewardship, not extractive ownership, but of the lands of our ancestors,
Mhm.
stewardship that we should have of
Mhm.
those lands, and also our right to stewardship here as descendants of enslaved and migrant people. Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about what that stewardship should look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. People never ask me about that. And it's something I really care about, and I'm learning more and more about, because it's some people like question like, is it incrementable? This the demand that non-Black indigenous people to this land have, like their right of return to of their lands, and then also what we know, centuries long stewardship cultivation of the land by people who were enslaved Africans and descendants of enslaved Africans. How do we commensurate those two things? And for me, I think it goes back. It's something I'm still trying to figure out for sure. And I don't think we can have Black land projects that are absent of non-Black Native folks. And I think that there's a lot of overlap that happens in places where Native or Indigenous communities have historically lived, or their ancestral lands, with places that Black people were enslaved on this land. And so we have to be in relationship with each other to figure this out. That's the only thing I can see. Like, I don't imagine myself ever doing a land-based project ever in the US without being in relationship and conversation um, with Native folks. And I think it is not about me saying land ownership, me having a claim to just a claim to owning land, but how might me and the community that I belong to take up this land as like stewardship, to not just extract all that we can, but to actually cultivate it, to grow food, to build community, to live in the way that we say we want the world to be. And to me, that's what stewardship is. It's saying, this is the place that I am in. How am I going to take care of it so that when I'm no longer alive, or when I depart from it, it is not depleted? It is actually still in a place for another group of people or another person to steward it to. Because if my relationship to it has been completely extractive, then no one else can continue to cultivate it after I leave. If all I did was pave it with fossil fuel energy sources, or build prisons on top of it, or detention centers, jails, or sweatshops on top of it, who's supposed to come on that land afterwards? What they're supposed to do with it? And so that stewardship is making it so that people can come after you, that so that it's not dependent on, like, it has not been destroyed, but you have actually helped to regenerate that. And I don't have all the answers to how we figure that all out, particularly between Black folks who are not indigenous to this land. And that's even trouble, like what that really means. And because we got Black folks who are also Black and Native, we know that. And then Native folks who are not Black. So I think that there, and the hope that I have is that there are people who are figuring that out in real time, like right now. And I'm continuing to learn from them. But stewardship at the end of the day goes about, what am I doing? It's about, what am I doing on this land, so that when I am no longer here, when I leave it, that it is also poised for someone else to steward it after me.
Right. That whole leaving something for the generations to come piece is
Mm-hmm.
so important. And a lot of what we do in higher education is
Right.
about preparing those future generations to move forward and live
That's right.
with integrity,
That's right.
in
That's
the
right.
years to come. We do
Right.
have, I think we have time for one more question. This is from Dr. Amina Anderson.
Mhm.
Oregon State University hosts a social justice tour that tells the university's story of social injustice building to building. The idea is to acknowledge where the institution has been and where it aspires to go. It's quite moving and fascinating to hear today's student tour guides tell their stories. It's a step in healing to acknowledge the history. I guess that's a wonderful comment. Um,
Yes.
and I guess I would just ask that you comment on the comment.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. And acknowledging the history of like what has happened and what the institution has done. And then necessarily for me, I ask like, how is the institution ceding its power or transferring or giving up or moving the power that it has to make decisions about the land that it's on and the resources that it has, excuse me, to the communities that it has been a part of harming, like and a part of like it's been a part of the harm that the communities have experienced. And so what I know about Oregon, at least on a base level, is that there are still like Native communities who are there now. They're still alive. They're still living. And so whose ancestral lands does the University of Oregon currently, or Oregon, excuse me, not University of Oregon, was it Oregon State you said? Oregon State, do they own? Whose land? Are they like, whose ancestral land are they on, and how are they in relationship with them? How have they interacted with other marginalized communities in the area that they're in? So once they do the work of acknowledgement, how is power going to be changed? How is decision making and access to resources going to change after that? And because acknowledgement is not enough. It's not enough. It's necessary. It's not sufficient. And so I think it's really important in the arc of a student's life, in the arc of a student's education in particular, to have that opportunity to learn it, and then where's the opportunity for action? Be it whether it happens at Oregon State or not, that's one thing. Like, where's the invitation into further action? To not just acknowledge what has happened, but to make sure that it doesn't happen again, and to address the impact of what happened before.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we have 4 minutes. We have time for one more question. Uh, we don't have any in the chat, so I will ask the one that I have here.
Okay.
So many of our students are looking to dig in their heels, in movement, and we know that joining organizations is very important for them here, and we watch
Yeah.
them and we support them in it. But can you offer some advice to our students who are looking to be a part of movement or to be a part of something bigger or greater than them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, one, you are a student, so don't forget that this is like going to be one of the few times you ever have in life to just study. And if you work, like I had to work when I was a student, and I really wish I'd had more time to just learn stuff. So don't forget that part. Like when you leave that, because you're going to leave one day, will you have left like having the opportunity to learn about the things that you want to learn about, be it inside the classroom or outside the classroom? And oftentimes it might have to happen outside the classroom, to be honest. Much of my learning about a lot of things happen outside of the classroom. For the first time in my life, I actually feel like I'm learning a lot of the stuff that I want to learn in the classroom. But don't forget that you're a student, and there's so much value in that. That's the first thing. And then two, I think that this is connected to not forgetting that you're a student. Like, pace yourself. You can't do everything. The problems of the university didn't pop up just because when you got there. They're not gonna go away when you leave completely. And so what is it that you want to accomplish while you're there? And what are you leaving? What are you putting in place for the folks who come after you? Like, because it can't just be about you. And this happens so much where like the seniors leave, and then what happened to the organization? Because the first year students or the second years or whomever were not brought into leadership. And the leadership should happen as early as possible, so that as many people can hold that work and have like memory outside of like the one charismatic leader or the few leaders who like make all the decisions and do all the work all the time. And I know that's easier said than done. In my experience, it's been easier said than done for sure. But don't forget you're a student and pace yourself. Like, you don't have to do everything. Why are you in 5 organizations? You're like, why? What is the need? Because I imagine you're not the only one who knows how to do a thing, or not the only one who cares about a thing. So that first point about building many strong leaders is super, super important. And healing justice is not just about the outside world. It is about you. It is about you too, and how you're able to show up to the work. Because if you all broken and busted, how you showing up to the meetings doing the work that you say you want to do when you're just angry because you haven't gotten the care that you deserve and that you need? So that's the best advice that I could give from what I've learned in this work.
Excellent advice.
Thank you
so much. And thank you, Miss Charlene Carruthers, for being here with us. You are a breath of fresh air.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed this, and I'm sure that everybody on the call did as well. We hope to see you again soon. Good luck with everything that's going on with your program. Northwestern, congratulations on this wonderful book.
Thank you.
I know it's been out for a minute, but it's definitely, this one, you guys, is a must read.
Okay, thank you.
And we hope to see you again soon. And thank you to everybody who's been here and for the questions. Thanks so much. And thanks.
All right. Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.